back to The Overlook. I'm your host, Dominique Hoffman, and today we are going to be talking about Iran, where the current administration is with the nuclear talks that they have been involved in the last few months, and why the woke right or the isolationist movement on the right is trying to parallel a potential conflict with Iran with that of the 2003 Iraq invasion. We're going to take a look at that and also what this means just for the woke right in general and try and pinpoint some of Tucker Carlson's motives for what are emerging as more extreme interpretations of the Iraq war and of a potential conflict with Iran, which he poses America would be the loser of. So we're going to look at why he's saying that, how he has shifted on his policy position, and why a war or an escalation with Iran would not look anything like the war in Iraq. Let's get into the episode. So as I mentioned, there's been a parallel or a concerted effort to create a comparative parallel between Iraq and even Afghanistan and neocon ambitions in the region in trying to bring a war to the doorsteps of Iran to further elite corruption, money with a lot of these military contractors. I think an important note is that the term neocon, as it has been rewritten or reimagined by the woke right, is a synonym for Zionism. It's often used as a synonym for the Jews, for the Jewish cabal that is running DC. It's the same cabal that is pushing forth a war between Israel and the Palestinians, in which people like Tucker Carlson and the woke right would say the United States has no business in being allies with Israel, despite the fact that they're the only democracy in the Middle East, despite the fact that we've had decades-long cooperation, which benefits the United States as well. He frames that interest as being driven by neocons in Washington, D.C. Now, the term neocon also lives in the imagination of many millennial or boomer Americans who were very much present for the Iraq war back in 2003. Now, the Bush administration was pursuing a policy of proliferating democracies in the region. There was also trumped up charges or accusations that Iraq had obtained weapons of mass destruction. And that accusation is important because while that didn't exist in Iraq, Tucker Carlson is trying to downplay the threat of nuclear capabilities in Iran in very much the same way. So kind of framing, they told us that there was weapons of mass destructions in Iraq. So they're also telling us the same thing exists in Iran. And it is just a rally around the flag effect that the neocons are trying to inspire in the hearts of every American to go to war with a country we have no business going to war with. There is a sense of romanticizing a pre-Iraq war America. When Tucker Carlson speaks of the America he lives in now is not the America that he grew up in. There's also language kind of coloring international liberalism, the post-World War II global order with America at the center, that hegemonic power, as being the downfall of America. So this idea of MAGA in the reimagined woke right sphere is making America great again, but restoring it to a pre-international liberal world order. Now, for many reasons, that's not obtainable, particularly because of globalization and industrialization and technology. We live in a technological world that didn't exist prior to World War II. And this reimagined idea of restoring America to what it was is restoring America back to a world in which we weren't the hegemonic power. So with hegemony comes the responsibility of playing a role in the global stage and in geopolitics. This push for isolationism in the name of America first actually puts America last. If America were to retreat from the global stage, China, Russia, Iran would quickly fill our presence abroad and seize upon absorbing our hegemony. So while I am not a neocon in the way the word has now been reimagined, I am a believer in America first means America having a robust presence abroad, both through hard and soft power. Now, hard power, of course, being military capabilities as well as economic capabilities, does not mean that America has to escalate to war around the world. I think that's also something Tucker Carlson, the woke right, has peddled, that if you are a neocon, which is what they imagine to be someone who supports American presence abroad, then you want to see endless wars, you want to see wars of election, and you want to impose an American way of life on other civilizational identities around the world in order to push America's interest in the name of democracy, but really in the name of elite corruption and military economies that would then enrich and line the pockets of the corrupt politicians in Washington, D.C. Now, again, I revisit all of this by saying the implied next step of that is that the Jews, the Zionists, are the ones pushing this military agenda around the world. Okay, so that was a lot. Where I stand personally, I'm not a neocon. I reject the Bush administration foreign policy. I think it was an extreme example of Jacksonian foreign policy. It was, in essence, neocolonialism through military strength abroad. The accused or supposed weapons of mass destructions in Iraq was essentially a red herring to go to war with a country that we didn't have a just reason to go to war with. Now, I also believe that it wasn't just the United States that destabilized Iraq. Iran has played a huge role over the last decade and a half in internally destabilizing Iraq, who they were also at war with throughout the 90s. That oftentimes goes unnoticed. And what we see is a concerted effort by Tucker Carlson and the woke right to cover up the Iranian regime's attempts to destabilize the region. And they've done that through proxy warfare in Iraq as well. So I am not a supporter of the Bush administration's foreign policy in the Middle East, but that does not mean then I'm going to swing to the other extreme and say that America should have no presence on the global stage or that we should not exert our hard power and our capabilities when we are directly challenged or threatened. And Tucker Carlson's response to that is, again, to frame the accusations that Iran has a nuclear weapon as a false or a largely over-exaggerated accusation on the part of neocons to try and inspire war with the regime. So there's many things wrong with that. We're going to first look at the rhetoric that Tucker Carlson has used surrounding Iran. And then we're going to look at the very established decades-long initiative by the Iranian regime to acquire nuclear weapons. And then I'm also at the end going to look at Tucker Carlson's shift in being pro-Iraq war to now. And again, you can change your policy positions. I think we've even seen in the last 5 years here in the United States how people are constantly evolving in their political position. But I believe Tucker Carlson, who sounds a lot more like an apologist for Russia or for the mullahs in Iran, is essentially being bought off. His interests are being tied to the regime through funding, likely through Qatari funding. I don't have evidence for that, but I'm going to try and decipher why he can claim to be America first and then in the same breath say that America would lose a war with Russia and Iran, which is a blatantly false statement when you just look at the capabilities of the United States versus both of these regimes. And in the case of both Russia actually and Iran, who are both occupied by wars and conflicts abroad, we can gauge their capabilities or the gaps in their capabilities based off of the long wars that they have both been fighting in Russia and Ukraine, and then Iran via its proxies in the Middle East, and the regime has been greatly weakened. So we know for a fact that if the United States ever had to engage in a war between both of these nations, it would not only be a fair fight, but United States capabilities far outpace that of both regimes. So I would maybe present an alternative that Tucker Carlson is peddling talking points that sound very similar to both regimes, again, because his interests are being lobbied by these regimes. Okay, so let's first take a look at some tweets that Tucker Carlson has made in regards to Iran. So this tweet was made April 7th. Again, I want to point out this is not a fringe idea. This idea of let's restore America to a pre-Iraq, pre-neocon corrupted United States is one that is at the cornerstone of this woke right movement and this neo-isolationist movement. This tweet got 9.5 million views. And so one of the critiques when it comes to even the term woke right is that, well, the woke left has, authority and influence in all the established institutions and through establishment media. But Tucker Carlson has kind of replaced the establishment media, and he carries a ton of influence. And with that has also come the funding from Qatar that once went towards establishment media, and the funding has followed the influence, which Tucker Carlson now holds. And so in this tweet back on April 7th, he's talking about the tariffs, but he also incorporates Iran. He says, Whatever you think of tariffs, it's clear that now is the worst possible time for the United States to participate in a military strike on Iran. We can't afford it. Thousands of Americans would die. And this is something Tucker Carlson does a lot. He fear mongers. He'll, think back to the Iraq War where our sons died. That's going to happen again. The tariffs are going to hurt our economy temporarily. And because of that, the American people cannot withstand a war with Iran, which would see thousands of American troops being deployed, which no iteration of conflict with Iran has ever involved a potential outcome where we put American troops on the ground. This would largely be a conflict like we saw between Iran's missile attack on Israel and then Israel's counterattack fought through missiles, not boots on the ground warfare. We lose the war that follows. This is the part that is insane to me because in an interview with, who was it with? I just watched it. He essentially said that we would also lose a war with Russia, which is, with Alex Jones. He had a 2-hour and 6-minute interview with Alex Jones where he basically said that the United States would lose a war with Russia as well. So we see Tucker Carlson claiming to be this like American patriot and being, enlightened by the truth and then claiming that we would lose a war with Iran, which is absolutely ludicrous. Our economy, our manpower, our technology, so again, our hard and soft power far outpace the Iranian regime. We have essentially propped up the Iranian regime with a false sense of capabilities and capitulating to them. And again, because diplomacy from the American perspective or choosing the diplomatic route means that America doesn't actually have to choose between allowing Iran to have the bomb or having to intervene to prevent Iran from having a bomb. So it's essentially this plausible deniability. If we can just dance around the word diplomacy, the United States never has to take a hard line. But rest assured, the United States would never lose a war with Iran. And Tucker Carlson's position is that, well, that's the neocon position. That's the position to, throw America into a bunch of needless wars. Again, I'm not pro wars of election, but the Iranian regime is a stated enemy of the United States that is clear with all of their rhetoric. And we saw after October 7th, their ambition to destabilize the region, which include our own interests abroad, which means that we do have to respond in a way that we didn't have to respond with Iraq in the early 2000s. He goes on to say, nothing would be more destructive to our country. Also, again, false. This is the fear mongering. This is like this huge issue. And yet we're closer than ever, thanks to unrelenting pressures from neocons. Again, that word neocon, this is suicidal. It's, again, not suicidal. If you truly believe America is more capable than the Iranian regime, anyone advocating for conflict with Iran is not an ally of the United States, but an enemy. Why would I say the inverse of that is true? Any American advocating for Iran or downplaying the threat of Iran in the name of American patriotism, I think is not only ludicrous, it's backwards, but it also is so illogical and it is such a misrepresentation of facts and of reality. And again, I'm not a neocon. I'm not, supporting wars of election around the world on the name of democracy in the United States. But to frame a legitimate war with that accusation and claim to be America first and, claim that this conflict would mean thousands of Americans dead is fear-mongering on behalf of the Iranian regime. It is an attempt to pacify Americans into not only being uninterested in defending ourselves abroad, but being anti-war and anti-American hegemony on the global stage. Okay, so this is another tweet by Tucker Carlson. This is a recent one. It's a rather long one as well. And it goes, I'm going to break it down. So he says, Mark Levin was at the White House today lobbying for war with Iran. To be clear, Levin has no plans to fight in this or any other war. He's demanding that American troops do it. This has never been part of any plan. Again, like I said, this would be some sort of a missile attack, a missile engagement. I, of course, can never promise with some sort of an externality like that no American troops would be killed. We've had American troops killed by the Houthis in the Red Sea over the last year and a half. And that is the result of capitulating to the Houthis. So there is, of course, no conflict or no escalation that we can then promise no American troops would die. But the idea that this war would be fought with American troops on the ground, again, that is never how this has been proposed. That's never how this has been envisioned. And that's not even how the proxy war between Israel and Hamas has played out. We need to stop Iran from building nuclear weapons. He and like-minded ideologues in Washington are now arguing. This has been like the official line with Iran for decades, is they cannot have a nuclear bomb. They are a rogue actor in the region that seek to destabilize the region, and not just Israel. For those who want to throw like you're a Zionist back at the argument, Saudi Arabia also does not want Iran to have nuclear weapons. That is really the hinge of the Abraham Accords, is some sort of a security pact and increased cooperation to leverage other nations in the Middle East against the threat of Iran. That is really what made the Abraham Accords so successful. And I believe what this administration should lean into for its second term. If this sounds familiar, it's because the same people have been making the same claim since at least the 1990s. Well, it's because in the 1990s, that's when Iran accidentally leaked that they were building secret nuclear manufacturing facilities. It's a lie. In fact, there is zero credible intelligence that suggests Iran is anywhere near building a bomb or has plans to. This is the most, and this is where I'm saying, I'm sorry, Tucker Carlson is being bought off by foreign interests, and it's so blatant. There are robust monitoring services and analysis. Here is the Institute for Science and International Security. There are a bunch of nuclear monitors who are not Zionists, who are most definitely not sympathetic to Israel, who monitor Iran. The International Atomic Energy Agency released a comprehensive report on Iran's non-compliance with the Obama era policy, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and its safeguard obligations. What Tucker Carlson and many within the isolationist party are supporting is diplomacy, which failed under the Obama administration. Diplomacy doesn't work with a rogue nation that has zero-sum interest for the region and are essentially a death cult. They view this as a cosmic war. It is zero-sum. Their desire is to export the revolution, and the mullahs would rather die protecting their atomic capabilities than to just hand it over to the West, their greatest enemy. So there are a million reports when it comes to how much enriched uranium we know the Iranians have. We also, and I'm going to visit this, we have Khomeini actually tweeting on his Twitter talking about their nuclear capabilities. It's something that the Iranian regime brags about. We know for a fact that they have nuclear capabilities and they are building a nuclear bomb. So for Tucker Carlson to just blatantly lie about this, again, it's so intellectually dishonest. I have to wonder how a seasoned journalist like him could present such a falsity in the name of truth and journalism and not have interests that are paying him to say this. Anyone who claims otherwise is ignorant or dishonest. And this is the gaslighting with Tucker Carlson. He'll say anyone who says Iran has those capabilities, the mullahs themselves say this, they're ignorant, they're lying, they're dishonest. If the US government knew Iran was weeks from possessing a nuclear weapon, we'd be at war already. Well, yes, Tucker, that is actually the fork in the road moment we are currently in right now. And the Trump administration seemed to have pursued, because of internal pressures for isolationism and the vice president's own isolationist bent, Vice President Vance, to explore diplomacy with the regime, in which they essentially said, no go, no dice. We are not going to give up our nuclear programs. So then, Tucker, I have a question for you. If they don't have a nuclear program, then why are they so unwilling to engage diplomatically with the United States? If they're not seeking a bomb, then why don't they allow international monitoring to come in? Why don't they say, okay, well, we'll destroy the enriched uranium, which is far greater than what you would need for like nuclear factories and nuclear power. We have no problem giving that up. We'll pursue just nuclear power, which again, you don't need the amount of enriched uranium that they have for nuclear power, and then we'll be on the way. So if really Iran is as good natured as Tucker Carlson is making them seem in this tweet, why are they so diabolically opposed to diplomacy? Iran knows this, which is why they aren't building one. Iran also knows it's unwise to give up its weapons program entirely. He talks about Gaddafi in Libya, tried that and wound up sodomized with a bayonet. As soon as Gaddafi disarmed, NATO killed him. Iran's leaders saw that happen. They learned the obvious lesson. So again, he's blaming the West. He's blaming this like international liberal security pact, NATO, for why the mullahs, that's his explanation for why they won't give up all their nuclear power, because they saw what happened to Gaddafi. Important note, the same man, Dr. Khan, who provided dark and illegitimate channels of selling nuclear capabilities to Iran. He's the father of the Pakistani nuclear bomb, also gave weapons to Libya, which is why he mentions Gaddafi. But we see Tucker Carlson trying to get ahead of the argument and say, well, because of the liberal West killing Gaddafi, Iran will never fully give up their weapons. Not because their ambition is to essentially use their weapons or become a tyrannical actor in the region, but because the West was essentially not a good actor, or faithful to their agreement with Gaddafi. So why is Mark Levy once again hyperventilating about weapons of mass destruction? Again, weapons of mass destruction, that immediately harkens people's minds back to Iraq. Americans headed back to the Middle East to topple yet another government. Again, that idea of we're just going to do Iraq 2.0. And again, no iteration of what is on the table proposes that the United States should go into Iran with our soldiers' boots on the ground, nor are we prescribing a regime change. That was also one of the catastrophes of the Bush administration, was we're going to go in and we're going to force Iraq to become a diplomacy or a democracy. And that didn't work, because it turns out there are huge civilizational incompatibilities between the Arab world and democracies, and there's no prescription for regime change. We do know that there is internal pressures in Iran for regime change. There have been since the 1970s with the revolution that put the mullahs in power. But that pressure is largely internal. And if you ask any Iranian, they will tell you that. I don't think Tucker Carlson should speak for the Iranian people. America's record of overthrowing foreign leaders is so embarrassingly counterproductive that regime change has become a synonym for disaster. Officially, no one supports it. So instead of telling the truth about their motives, they manufactured hysteria. A country like Iran can never have a bomb. They'll nuke Los Angeles. We have to act now. Okay, October 7th was the perfect example of how evil and how exporting the revolution means a zero-sum aim of inflicting horror on non-Muslims, even on Muslims. On October 7th, Muslim men and women were raped, kidnapped, killed. This is a zero-sum regime that has radical death cult ideological ambitions for the region. So the hysteria is not manufactured. The hysteria is very much there, and we saw what that could look like on October 7th. That is just a microcosm of what the regime wants for the region, or how the regime treats their own people. Remember back in 2022, when women were being killed for not wearing their hijabs properly, their people can also speak to the atrocities of this regime. And unfortunately, the internal atrocities that the mullahs have committed against their own people is not enough for the United States to involve themselves with another sovereign nation. That part is true, but they have exported their revolution across the Middle East, and it involves our interests and our allies. He goes on to say, they don't mean this, and you can tell they don't by what they omit. At least two of Iran's neighbors, both Islamic nations, already have nuclear weapons. The fact should scare the hell out of Mark Levin, yet for some reason he never mentions it. How come? Because it's not the weapons he hates, it's the ideology of the Iranian regime, which is why he's lobbying to overthrow it. Well, yes, I think you actually should. Again, going back to the rhetoric of Tucker Carlson, if you are a good American, if you're a good Christian American, you should 100% hate the ideology of the Iranian regime and its agenda to invoke chaos across the region, again, that undermine our own interest. Israel likely has a nuclear weapon, and Pakistan is the other country in the region that has a nuclear weapon. And if Iran were to obtain a nuclear weapon, it will create an arms race in the Middle East that will disable the current world order when it comes to nuclear stability. And then there's the question of war itself. Iran might not have nukes, but it has a fearsome arsenal of ballistic missiles, many of them which are aimed at U.S. military installations in the Gulf, as well as our allies and critical energy infrastructure. The first week of a war with Iran could easily kill thousands of Americans. Again, he goes back to it could easily kill thousands of Americans. Well, actually, we could probably intercept most of the missiles, if not all of the missiles, like Israel did in April of 2024, if there was ever a direct escalation between the United States and Iran. This idea and this fear mongering that Iran is going to kill people in LA if we were then to escalate to war is the very fear mongering he's accusing Mark Levin of committing. And then he goes on to talk about our energy, consider the effects of $30 for a gallon of gas. Well, our allies in the region, including Saudi Arabia, would likely side with the United States. There's so many things wrong with this. And again, he's talking about the Gulf, and it's the Gulf who is, I think, incentivizing Tucker Carlson to say this stuff, i.e., Qatar. The entire thing reads as an apology for the Iranian regime. I have the rest of it up here on the screen if you would like to see this. The last part I want to read is, but the second week of the war could be even worse. Iran isn't Iraq or Libya or even North Korea. While it's often described as a rogue state, Iran has powerful allies. It's also now part of the global bloc called BRICS, which represents the majority of the world's landmass, population, economy, and military power. Iran has extensive military ties with Russia. It sells the overwhelming majority of its oil to China, which it shouldn't because of sanctions. Iran isn't alone. An attack on Iran would easily become a world war. We'd lose. Again, we would not lose, Tucker Carlson. And that is exactly what the chaos of, or the axis of chaos, which is China, Russia, and Iran, want the West to believe. And as we sit back and believe lunatics like Tucker Carlson, they're actually building their arsenal of capabilities, which then, if we allowed this and we kick this can down the road, could become a formidable fight between the West and the axis of chaos. Tucker Carlson has moved from being a skeptic of the neocons to being just an apologist for the Iranian regime, Russia, fear-mongering, trying to make the capabilities of the axis of chaos seem greater than they are, to try and make America docile in the fear of some sort of greater escalation and the loss of American lives. And again, because we have the memory of Iraq and Afghanistan in living memory, because we have the very, very recent memory of inflation from COVID-19, because we saw what lockdowns looked like, that fear is a very natural fear. Your average American doesn't know everything I just talked about or know how to rebuttal what Tucker Carlson is saying. They just hear, oh, life would change. Gas would be $30 a gallon, which it wouldn't. And then if we wait decades down the road, what Tucker Carlson is describing would then be our reality, but only because America was complacent and docile in the face of manufactured fear. We are still the greatest nation in the world as far as capabilities, hard and soft power, but that will change rapidly if isolationists end up prevailing. Okay. So let's now look at what Khomeini had to say on his ex. All right. The decline of major powers is influenced by Khomeini's revolution. So here we see similar talking points to Tucker Carlson. And again, if Tucker Carlson is sounding like Khomeini, there are issues. He is not the, red, white, and blue American like that he claims to be. So it says the decline of major powers is influenced by Khomeini's revolution. The sharp decline in the U.S.'s global status and influence has been affected by Khomeini's revolution. The widespread hatred of Zionism seen in the world today is influenced by Khomeini's revolution. The last part I actually would say is true. The widespread hate of Zionism, of what Zionism has been painted by, seen in the world today, is the direct influence of Khomeini's revolution, which is very scary because we have the right and the left in America. We have the West now talking about Zionism as if it's like an ideology and as if it's, representative of a cabal in Washington, D.C. So I would actually say the last part of this tweet is scarily accurate. And that should be sobering for everyone in the West. The rest of this is not. And Khomeini, just like in China, just like in Russia, has an incentive to downplay the United States global status. We are, again, still the hegemonic power of the world. And this sounds exactly like a summary of that long tweet I just read from Tucker Carlson, which again, if Tucker sounds like Khomeini, there are issues. In another tweet, Khomeini said, thousands of nuclear scientists and researchers have been trained in Iran. Should we disappoint them, make them unemployed, or take away their hope in our country's future? There is no internal hope for Iran's future. This again is so misrepresentative of what the actual Iranian people want and what they have been calling for. Iran is not a utopia. Iran is not a flourishing society and economy. There is no future for their country. So this is a bunch of bullcrap. The rude, insolent US leaders want this. Oh, we're so rude. You're right. You behead women. You detain women in morality facilities and beat and rape and torture them and maim them and mutilate them. But America's rude for wanting to ensure that that ideology isn't proliferated through tyranny of you having a nuclear weapon. They're opposed to progress and self-sufficiency for the Iranian people. The regime is representative of not progress, but it's regressive. And it's not a self-sufficient society for the Iranian people. It's a society of tyranny. This is just propaganda. But again, when Tucker Carlson sounds like Khomeini, that should cue everyone in to say, who is giving him these talking points? Why are his interests aligned with Khomeini? And why is he framing Iran's best interests as true America first policy? The last tweet I'll look at from Khomeini: a few years ago, one of the US presidents said he would dismantle the nuts and bolts of Iran's nuclear industry if he could. Of course, he admitted that he couldn't. Those in power today, the Zionists, again, you see that link between the woke right's use of Zionism and Khomeini's, the Islamist use of Zionism, and the Americans should know that they can't do a damn thing in this area. We actually could. We could just nuke the crap out of your nuclear facilities. And Israel's capabilities, as seen in their insanely precise warfare when it comes to taking out both Hezbollah and Hamas leaders, is highly capable also of doing so. But we are restrained by pressure and the global order, both on the left and on the right, to capitulate to the Iranian regime. If the United States responded directly to the Iranian regime, they would be so crippled. Their economy is so fragile. They have been completely depleted in their proxy warfare across the region that the regime would likely fall and there would be an internal revolution. And that is what the mullahs are absolutely terrified of. Remember, they are essentially a terrorist entity, and what they're interested in above all else is their own survival. And they're influencing people like Tucker Carlson via Qatar to peddle these talking points. Okay. Last thing I want to look at is this. Because when talking about Tucker Carlson, and again, I have no direct evidence that he is being influenced monetarily by Qatar. There was money that was transferred. Well, actually, that's not true. There was money that was transferred to an LLC, which means we don't know who's behind the LLC, but for Tucker Carlson to interview the Prime Minister of Qatar. But I think what is most telling is both his shift in rhetoric, which we're about to listen to, and how his rhetoric today parallels the Iranian regime, Qatar, Russia, claiming that the United States would lose thousands of lives in a war with Iran or thousands of lives in a war with Russia, or we would lose the war with both of those regimes. Again, despite the fact that their capabilities have been wholly underperformative in both of their respective conflicts over the last year and a half, 2-3 years, tells me that there is someone giving him these talking points, that perhaps there is that monetary influence. And what we've seen for the last decade is that influence was in the mainstream media. So we saw with the woke left, that's where influence culturally and politically was. That's also where Qatar's funding largely went to. But as that has shifted and as the MAGA movement has now become mainstream and popular, Qatar is going to follow the influence. The mainstream media and the woke left was just useful, both in their desire to see the West and the United States fall, but also to bend public opinion on the left to favor Islamism. And they've been extremely successful at that. Let's just go back to, was it this tweet? Right here. The widespread hatred of Zionism seen in the world today is influenced by Khomeini's revolution. That's 100% true. And that's because of direct funding Qatar to American universities, the woke left, the establishment media painting this narrative. But the woke left is largely crumbling. It was so extreme, and because we live in a democracy in the United States, despite outside foreign intervention and influence and funding, it was so extreme that now we're swinging away from it, but to another extreme. So while we have neo-Marxism, we have neo-fascism on the other end that we are now flirting with, and it is not a fringe idea anymore. Nick Fuentes represented that fringe idea for the better half of a decade, and now Nick Fuentes is like, first off, not influential anymore. But second off, he doesn't represent a fringe. He represents a mainstream movement. And so here we go. We're gonna look at this. But my entire point is that the new media, the anti-establishment media, is essentially a new establishment in and of itself. And we see with Tucker Carlson and his tweets getting what 6.8 million views, and the long one I read, 9.5 million views. His influence is what Qatar and other regimes are interested in. So just because he's now independent of Fox News doesn't mean that his ideas represent his own interest. He is being influenced just like the legacy media was influenced for decades. But let's look at what he had to say about Iraqis in a 2008 interview. Now, again, I preface this, people can change their minds, people can repent. But again, I think it points to a really stark shift in his rhetoric. So what we're seeing is he's like directly rebuking Islamism, which he's completely made a 180 on. He's saying that the Iraqis could just obey, and he sees them as illiterate, what was it, primitive monkeys. That's very damning if you contrast that with what he's saying today. Okay, so I think this is going to talk about Obama, which is besides the point for us. But my point being, he has starkly shifted from being anti-Islamist, anti-Islamic extremism to now being an apologist for the Iranian regime, for Qatar, for Russia. And that should beg the question for every American, for every conservative, as to why that shift happened. And yes, I'm sure Tucker Carlson's rebuttal would be that COVID-19 radicalized him against the government. He saw true corruption. But I would claim that he is just as corrupt for peddling the talking points of authoritarian regimes abroad in the name of America First policy. And with that, I will leave you in conversation with your friends and family. You can point out the differences between Iraq and Iran. We have ample evidence of the Iranian nuclear capabilities, if they have not already reached it, being very, very close. And the US policy is not pushing for regime change, just for protecting our interests abroad and preventing a arms race in the Middle East. With that, I will leave you. I will see you in the next episode. Please like, comment, and subscribe to the Fearless Project channel, and I will see you in the next one.